Hey, my name is Colin, and one day I was coming home from class, wondering what to do for my final communications project. I knew I wanted to do something about the early internet, but I didn't know where to start exactly. I tried checking out an old website called YTMND, but that was practically unusable. The Something Awful forums had a ridiculous $20 paywall, and I didn't feel like spending the money at the time. And many other forums, like bonsai.com for example, were gone, and I would have to use the Wayback Machine to view them, which was a bit tedious. After a few hours of researching early internet forums and taking notes, I felt like I hit a wall, and I took a break by watching a YouTube video by a creator named Wang, who made videos about early internet mysteries. I was hoping I'd be able to find some inspiration on what to look at for research, and in that video I watched, I recognized a song playing in the background. It was from one of my favorite childhood video games, Earthbound, or Mother 2 in Japan. At that moment, inspiration struck. I remember being 13, and occasionally scrolling through the Earthbound forums, which were called starman.net, named after one of the most popular enemies from the game. I remember being in awe at how friendly and open the community was, and I remember feeling like an internet archaeologist, scrolling through threads that were older than me. I also remember wondering, why was everyone so friendly? The internet is a really toxic place, even more so in the early 2000s. That made me wonder, why was starman.net such a civil and positive place at a time when the internet was known to be especially brutal? The Mother series is a turn-based RPG that originally released in 1989 for the Japanese Super Famicom. Mother 1 was not officially released to Western audiences until 2015, when it was renamed to Earthbound Beginnings. Mother wasn't released outside of Japan since the NES, the Western version of the Super Famicom, was at the end of its life cycle, and with the SNES set to release in November of 1989, it wasn't seen as profitable to take time to translate and distribute it. The second entry, Mother 2 in Japan and Earthbound in the West, was the only game to be released officially outside of Japan, Mother 3 not having an English translation to this day. Despite the lack of official accessibility for 2/3 of the Mother series due to the first and third games only being released in Japan, the Mother series grew a cult-like following of people who considered the series to be incredibly overlooked. The dark themes, surreal humor, and unique visuals gave the game a die-hard following that's still active to this very day, despite not having an official release for over 20 years. That led to the birth of the starman.net forums in 1999 by two people named Reedman and Tomato. I felt like it was best to cover the starman.net forums because they've had an active community for over 20 years. On top of that, I found it interesting to look at people who were fans of a very niche series gathered and shared tools with each other to get over these barriers and interact with others with similar passions. To gather data, I looked through hundreds of posts on the starman.net forums, ranging from 10 to 20 years ago. The accessibility of these older posts were one of the main reasons I chose to cover the forums. The site had an easy sorting tool that allows you to look at a list of all the users on the site. From there, I sorted by oldest and randomly selected around 200 users. I read their posts and looked through all the comments. Doing this is a lot simpler than going through other older forums, which most likely had to be viewed through the Wayback Machine, which is an internet archive that hosts captures of hundreds of thousands of defunct websites and URLs, which led to me deciding that starman.net was the thing I wanted to look at. I also did some research on other early websites on what expected behavior would look like from the forum user in the 1999 to 2012 range, as well as skimming archives and other older web pages that are still up, like 4chan, Newgrounds, and Something Awful forums. I decided to not even consider using what I saw on 4chan in this project, because some of the things I saw were just incredibly disgusting, and I didn't want to keep looking at it, so I'm considering it an outlier. For some backgrounds on the other websites I decided to look at for comparison, Newgrounds is an animation and game sharing platform launched in 1995 by a man named Tom Flupp. While not necessarily a forum, Newgrounds had a very dedicated community for over 20 years, and nearly every animation, drawing, and game posted from 20 years ago is still up. So I clicked many posts dating from 10 to 20 years ago, read through the comments, and watched the source material. The other website I looked at was the Something Awful forums, which unfortunately had a $10 account registration fee and another $10 fee to see archive threads from before 2014. Something Awful was one of the most influential websites regarding early meme and forum culture, with the forums mainly focusing on satirical content and blog posts. But, as the name suggests, some of the content in Something Awful was awful. With users of the website having a history of attacking people and being all around rude, with a reputation of lax moderation and ableism, especially towards individuals on the autism spectrum. Ironically, the original owner of the Something Awful forums sold it back in 2020 because of a sexual misconduct scandal. Since then, Something Awful has been on the decline. However, due to its influence in early internet culture, it was the best option for comparing it to Starman.net. Internet forums in the early 2000s were characterized by being much more toxic, with the internet as a whole being more of a Wild West. It was also a lot more anonymous, so many people expressed much more edgy language and viewpoints than what would be considered acceptable today. In Newgrounds and Something Awful, for example, people would rip into each other quite a bit in comments and threads, with personal insults being thrown around a lot. That's where Starman.net differed. Most of the oldest posts I looked at were simple posts that were discussing about how much they love the Mother series, or asking for resources to play a translated version of Earthbound Beginnings and Mother 3. Don't get me wrong, I did find a lot of weird threads about political issues unrelated to the Mother series, but most of those threads didn't really get as heated as I thought it would. It was mostly just civil discussion. For example, I found a thread that was posted 15 years ago that talked about gay marriage. The replies were all incredibly civil and empathetic, especially given how controversial topic like LGBTQ rights are, especially back in the 2010s, which is astounding to me given how much more brutal Something Awful was when it came to progressive issues at the time. I found one thread from 2005 on Something Awful, for example, that was just a guy listing off a bunch of marginalized groups he didn't like, as well as the slurs he wanted to call them. While people in the replies of the thread did call him out, the post wasn't removed despite the user being banned. The reasoning behind the ban was also unclear. Newgrounds was also similar to Something Awful in the allowed and the openly promoted content. While I do hold a lot of love for Newgrounds and the content that came from it, some of it can be described as having poor taste at best. For example, the creator of Newgrounds, Tom Flopp, created a game in 1999 called Pico School, which is a low-quality Flash project that followed an elementary schooler named Pico stopping goth kids from shooting up a school. For context, this game was released around the same time as the Columbine School Massacre, and Pico ended up becoming a secondary mascot for Newgrounds, with people using him in high-scale projects to this day. I bring up Pico and Tom Flopp to compare them to Tomato, one of the founders of Starman.net. Tom Flopp and Tomato are very similar in how they took a very hands-on approach to Starman.net and Newgrounds respectively, but they differed in the sense of the example they set for their respective communities. Tomato, for example, worked on translating the first and third Mother games for the Starman community, and his translation of Mother 3 is still the primary way English speakers play the game to this day, while he was just average and respectful guy on the community. It's an example for the rest of the community. Also credit the lack of toxicity in Starman.net to be because of the very stringent no-tolerance policy the forum had. And while I couldn't find an archive of the older versions of the rules page, I'm assuming it's similar to what it is today, because seeing a thread with negative undertones is challenging. There are two theories I think potentially explain why users on the Starman.net forums were so respectful with each other. That being the groupthink theory and the face theory. With groupthink being defined as a mode of thinking people engage in when they are deeply involved in a cohesive in-group, when the members striving for unanimity override their motivation to realistically appraise alternative courses of action. The reason I believe there's such good behavior on Starman.net, it was really the only place people could gather to talk about the Mother series on a wide scale with other fans. Conformity to the rules was almost essential to anybody who wanted to meet other people with the same niche interest. And given the no tolerance policy of the forums, it makes sense why such a healthy community was able to form under a more toxic internet. This also links to the theory of face, which is defined as the positive social value a person effectively claims for himself, by the line others assume he has taken during a particular contact. Face is an image of self delineated in terms
Hey, my name
of
is
approval
Colin.
social
One
attributes,
day, I was coming home from
albeit
class.
an
We're gonna
image
do
that
for my final
others may
communications
share,
project.
such as when a
I
person
knew
makes
I
a
wanted
good
to do
showing
something about the early internet,
for his profession
but
or
I
religion,
didn't know where to
or
start
making a good
exactly.
showing of themselves.
I tried checking
Users
out
on the
a website
Starman.net
called
forums had to put
YTMND,
on a more
but that
respectful
was practically
face.
unusable.
They wanted friends with the
There's something
similar
awful
niche
forums had a
interest.
ridiculous
Goffin
$20
says something similar in
paywall, and
his
I
article,
didn't feel like
stating,
spending the
just
money
as
at
the
time.
member of any group is
And many
expected
other
to have
forums like
self-respect,
bonsai.com,
so
for example,
also
were
is he
gone.
expected to
And I would
sustain
have to
a
use the Wayback
standard
Machine
of
to view them, which was a bit
consideration.
tedious.
He is expected to go to
After a few hours of
certain lengths to save
researching
the
early internet
feelings
forums
and
and taking
face
notes,
of
I felt
others'
like I hit a
prejudice.
wall, and I took a break.
And he is expected
by
to
watching
do this
a YouTube
willingly
video
and
by a creator named
spontaneously
Wang.
because of emotional
He made videos about
identification
early internet mysteries.
with others and their feelings.
I was hoping I'd
In
be able to find
consequence,
some
he is
inspiration
disciplined to
what
witness
look
the
at for research,
defacement
and
of
I
others.
did, but just not in the
The
way I expected.
moderators of Starman.net did an excellent job in ensuring people put up a more positive face. As stated above, almost all threads I read had a very respectful air to them. And because of the culture the moderators helped establish by being firm but fair, users had to maintain this respectful face or else be shunned by the rest of the forum. I also believe the Mother series' core themes also contributed to the community's friendliness. While being a goofy satire of American culture, the Mother series at its core is a game about friendship and doing the right thing, helping other people and overcoming unbeatable odds. And I feel like the cult-like following the Mother series grew, those values in the game may have stuck with the people that use the Starman.net forums. With such a positive focus on a forum, users on it may be more likely to take a more positive approach when it comes to interacting with others. So, now you may be wondering, why does this even matter? Well, I feel like my research explains how strong leadership positively affects group behavior in a smaller, more niche communities, like Starman.net and Newgrounds. I learned through my research just how influential a creator of a small group has over it. Flup and Tomato, who were able to shape the culture of their respective webs almost single-handedly just by nature of being the founder. My research also has practical benefits for people who want to build a small online community or expect to take on a minor leadership position if they want to create a strong and healthy environment. Being in charge but still casual and friendly is an effective strategy for environments in the real world. Tomato, for example, embodied that, being friendly but firm when it came to leadership, which built him a long-lasting community. Small online communities in modern times have negative feelings towards people with leadership position. Calling someone a Discord mod or a Reddit mod is a common insult now in online spaces, because some people with even a minuscule amount of power let that power get to their heads. Because of this power tripping and overimposing in a lot of communities, the community tends to fall apart or find other places to gather. Which something that hasn't happened to Starman.net due to the friendly but firm moderation, striking a good balance between letting people having fun but fairly punishing those who break the rules, which a lot of people fail to find a good grasp for today.